Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our webinar today on generative AI, Microsoft Copilot, and the exciting possibilities beyond. For those that are new to Kopis, let me introduce ourselves. For growing organizations, there's a moment when you hit a gap between what your technology enables you to do and what you need to accomplish your objectives. And Kopis bridges that gap, finding the true business problems that are holding you back and implementing the right technology solutions to advance your mission. Whether you need to develop new digital products for your customers like mobile apps or implement Microsoft Cloud solutions, CRM or Business Central, or build custom software for your organization, we're here to help. A few housekeeping items before we get started. We certainly welcome your participation and questions throughout this session. So please, if you have one, send in that question. Do so through the question submission box. I know we've received a lot of questions already, and we're excited to talk through those at the end and throughout the presentation. And at the end, if you'd love to schedule a deep dive session with us, Josh and I would love to strategize with you and help educate. You can do that with the Calendly link, and we're happy to give you that one-on-one guidance and collaborate on how you could use generative AI within your organization. With those items out of the way, let's get started. My name's Adam Drews. I'm our Chief Technology Officer. My background's in custom software development, business workflow automation, and ERP. I lead a team of purposely varied skill sets who are focused on helping our clients get to right problem and right solution and helping you bridge that gap and achieve what your business needs to be successful. And I'm joined by Josh Spraker, who's leading our generative AI development. Josh, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Adam. So my name's Josh Spraker. I'm one of our solution architects, which is the team that Adam was just referring to here at Kopis. I've been with Kopis for over 12 years now. And for most of that time, it was spent as a full stack developer. So working on applications and solutions from the database all the way up to the front end. Today, again, I work as a solution architect on our team, and we help clients solve problems. And we do that by helping to clearly identify the problems that they may have. And then my job is to help pull the right resources in together to help design a solution that's going to work. And then ultimately, throughout the implementation process, to make sure we carry out a successful implementation. As Adam also mentioned, I help lead our generative AI development. So today I'm going to be here and helping talk about some of these areas and help shed light on some of the maybe confusing topics, because this is sort of new for a lot of the world. And I'm also here to try to help hopefully get your mind turning around like some of the opportunities that you may have in your own businesses to leverage AI.
Thanks, Josh. We're happy to have you. All right. So showing a little bit of thank you, everyone, for your submissions. Definitely see some interest and definitely some folks just, it looks like, learning right now and kind of looking at where they might want to invest in the future. So thank you for that. We're definitely in some places in the early adopter phase, so we'll talk about that as we get into even things like Copilot and where we think some of the generative AI topics and solutions are going. So we're going to start with some backgrounds. We're not going to assume you know everything. So some of this will be review for some folks, but try to give you a little bit of a foundation upon which all of this is built. And then we're going to go specifically and talk about Microsoft's Copilot brand and the different products within that. And then Josh is going to go even deeper about where we can go beyond Copilot. And then we've got a number of questions already. And so we're going to go through some of those questions and answer some specific things that are on your mind. All right. So to start out with, we're talking about generative AI. So when you hear on the news and you hear the term AI, that's a pretty broad group of different technologies, a lot of them all building up. The specific one we're talking about today is generative AI, in which It's ultimately predicting the outcome, or in some cases it's text, like how a human would respond. So that generation, so it's taking input, it is understanding that, and by understanding, it's taking that and making a mathematical representation of a concept, and then most of the AI processes are predominantly statistical based. So you may have heard of machine learning in the past. So generative AI is no different. It is very statistical based, and so as it represents concepts, so it does so in what's called a vector. And a vector is simply, if you think about positions in space, X, Y, and Z, that's a three-dimensional vector. So if we have a position in space, we might define that with the coordinates X, Y, and Z. And so a concept in generative AI is no different. So it would be the equivalent, but each dimension represents a concept. So we have way more than three concepts. We have thousands. Maybe in some models, there are maybe millions of dimensions. But hard to think of that outside beyond 3D space. So if we use our 3D space kind of analogy, when we think of two concepts that are close, we can actually do math on the vectors to see how close they are, right? So if you just think about visually, if I've got 2 points over here and a point over here, these two concepts, if we're just talking about 3D space, are really close to each other, and so they mean some similar things. And so when we think about our vectors, and we think about the math that we can do on them, think about if a vector represented the word king, and we had another vector represented the word man, and we said king minus man plus woman, then the most common answer would be queen, right? So now we can do vector math to actually get to different concepts. And so behind the scenes, all of this input is resulting in a bunch of vector math. And what's really great at vector math, graphic cards. So you may have seen NVIDIA, for instance, a large maker of graphic cards. Stock has probably gone through the roof with all of the generative AIs going on. That's because they're really good at vector math. And so behind the scenes, they are, that's what those types of engines are powering. Very large matrix math are powering the compute for this. So from there, how do we get to, so we've got the math behind it, we still have to train it. So in GPT 3.5, GPT 4, they fed tons of documents, tons of sources into the model. And in 3.5, the model, the vector space, the number of dimensions was so big. With 4, they made it even larger, and they fed even more training material. And so the precision has increased, and they're working on GPT-5 with an even larger model and even more data sources. So the amount of improvement continues to grow and grow and grow. And so behind the scenes, the model itself combines a number of different techniques to actually predict what a human would give, giving the source material, so all that training, what the human would give as a response, is predicting that with statistical algorithms. And so, humans have more specific knowledge bases. We can't contain everything that GPT-4 and 3.5 have produced. So you can also fine tune it. So you can take a GPT-4 model and then add your own data sources. And you can do this in Azure Open AIs. You can add your own data sources and give the results of those. And then now you've tuned your model to your own, maybe potentially your own data. So that's the beginning. That's the foundation pieces. And then ChatGPT and other things take it a little bit further. And I'll let Josh explain how that works.
Yeah, sure. So I think Adam did a really good job of explaining the multidimensional vector space and how information is located. I think one thing to keep in mind is that these models are trained on a finite set of data, right? And Adam mentioned you can do some fine tuning on that training. But also you may have data within your system and you may not want to go the route of training your own model or finely tuning a model. So you need to be able to access your own data in a way that we can do the similar sort of similarity lookup that Adam mentioned before. And we can do that by using what's called an embedding models that can convert data into those vectors that Adam was mentioning before. And so you can prepare your own internal data in this way so that you can do lookups against that data using these same sort of concepts to help implement them into your own internal processes. And what that internal process is a RAG. Commonly, that process is called a RAG type implementation. And that stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation. So what that process is to retrieve data from your own sources so that you're enhancing the user's prompt. So if you think about ChatGPT or Copilot, when you enter information in to the chatbot, that input, well, not necessarily in ChatGPT standpoint, but in Copilot, from Copilot's perspective, it can go do a simplified RAG implementation where it will go look up information that it has access to, augment the original question from the user with additional context or information, and then pass that through to the model so that it can give you a more context-sensitive response. So that is generally called a RAG implementation. It's one of the most popular natural language processing techniques to help improve your results when using a large language model. Now, awesome. In addition, in that RAG process, you can add additional functionality to that process by using what's known as plugins. Plugins are, again, you can break them up generally into a couple of different concepts. One would be a connector type of plugin, which can help bring data from external sources into that pipeline. So one explanation of this would be, or one example of this would be something like connecting to HubSpot to pull some information out about customers or opportunities, and then enhancing the original prompt with that information. Other kinds of plugins can perform side effects or actions in the real world. So it may be it may be posting some data to an endpoint within that process. So one example that I think we will probably touch on later could be that one plugin pulls in some information, looks up data specific or context, business specific context, and adds it to that prompt, does some analysis on it, and then posts an action to another API so that an actual change is made in the real world. So these plugins are generally written to the OpenAI specification so that they can be interoperable between different frameworks and platforms. And that allows us to really have a whole marketplace of different plugins that you can use in your pipeline to help really build out some cool functionality.
Awesome. So now we have a model that has all the base knowledge. We can fine tune that model to get more specific answers, maybe over time of what you've seen over time, or you can go get, maybe more live information or more relevant information from your own data sources like SharePoint or CRM, HubSpot, ticketing systems. So we can pull that information in, and then we can go do things on that. And so, all those things combined make this very potent. Now, keep in mind, generative AI and all these techniques are a tool, right? So it doesn't mean that we only use generative AI techniques, right? It's part, just like the Microsoft ecosystem is a tool. We don't use the Microsoft ecosystem alone, we look at the right problem and we try to find the right solution. So, these tools become more and more interoperable, and so that's when combining things like these techniques with Power Platform can really shine. So let's move in to a specific set of implementations of generative AI. So Microsoft has released the Copilot brand, or I should say, has released things around Copilot. The Copilot's name has been thrown around a lot. It represents a brand. And so underneath that brand, just like Dynamics or Power Platform, there are a number of different services. So the one that was most widely available first was originally called Bing Chat, now called Microsoft Copilot. So if you're in your browser, you can hit the Copilot button and you can ask a question, and it's both searching as well as doing a generative AI query, and so it's a chat format. So it's going in. One of the plugins it has is to go be able to search out on the web and actually feed the web pages into the results. So it's basically doing what Josh called the RAG. It's taking that context from those websites, injecting it into your question, and giving you an answer and making references. So there's also Copilot for M365. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in depth here in just a moment. Business Central is releasing a Copilot as well. So in this major release, so April and October are the major releases for most of the Dynamics brand platforms. And so they will have a new major release that's going to begin to unlock things like chat within Business Central. Copilot for Power Automate has already been launched. You can actually, for your workflows, you can say what you want to do, and it will go and bring in the different actions and triggers to do what you've asked it to do. So that's a great way to just kind of begin working and execute on those Power Automate flows. Copilot for Sales. This is a good example, in my opinion, of where they're using both the fine tuning and the RAG. So what we're doing in the CRM platform, there's more specific actions, right? We've narrowed our focus to what, say, sales reps are doing. And so you can use fine tuning to give better answers around that. And then it's also pulling back information from CRM. Lastly, we've got Copilot Studio, and that's how you can begin. This is early phases of beginning to do some of the orchestrations, using the generative AI platform to make a plan rather than making a workflow like very procedurally, what we might do in Power Automate. We're actually looking at things where you can begin to ask, the generative AI model to make the plan and then go execute on that. So that's in its early phases. I did not advance my slide, I apologize. One thing to note also, as I skipped this slide just a second ago, I've tried to put in real life examples of using Copilot in all of these slides. So you'll see some of the good, the bad, and the ugly, where it's pretty exciting in what it can do. But you'll see that we still need a human in the loop. So you'll see some examples of that as well. All right. So the first one I'd like to talk about, we're going to talk about Outlook, Word, PowerPoint, and we'll briefly touch on Excel, but we'll end with Teams. So the two big things that you can do. So if we're looking at Copilot for M365, this is an add-on to the E3 or above license. If you have Copilot for M365, the two things that main things that it's added are the summary and drafting an email. I have found that the summary has been pretty helpful. In fact, so we have a ticketing system for our Business Central support, and inevitably on tickets there can be back and forth. And so if I've been away from my email for a while and I see something that maybe I could help on, the first thing I do is I say, summarize this email. And it actually does a pretty good job of taking all of the huge, could be a huge thread, and putting in something like you might be able to see on the screen here. You can also use the draft and create an email. This one, I would say I have mixed results. Sometimes it's a good way to, write it a little bit informally and then generate it and then tweak it. So that's probably how I've used it the most on most of my emails, and I write a lot of email. I would say that I'm using that maybe 10% of the time. So I'm predominantly just doing normal email, but for certain ones that maybe you might spend a little extra time on, you might use the draft. And I'll show you another example of where you can do this that might even be more powerful in just a moment. Copilot for Word. Okay, so this one you can begin to generate documents within Word. And when you open a document, if you've got Copilot enabled, the first thing you'll see is the draft with Copilot. You can additionally highlight different areas, and you can have it rewrite that text. It doesn't ask you how you want to rewrite it, so that'd be a place where, I think we'll see improvement in the future. And generally speaking, when we think about, so we talked about the RAG technique, the retrieval technique. Word is what we've seen predominantly looking within the current document. So in this example, I had a number of notes for this webinar, and I asked it to generate the intro for the webinar. And the last few things in this piece was Josh's introduction. And so it took a guess at that, and it generated some pieces that I could probably use, and you probably heard me say. But you can see where there's some places where it didn't get everything right, because it didn't know everything about us and Kopis and that's stored in other places. So what I've seen here, and what my theory is, that it's trained on lots and lots of templates. And so if you're beginning a document, so I began a procedure document for us internally about a month ago. That one generated a wonderful procedure document. So getting started there, that was a pretty good use. The next is PowerPoint. You can see this slide is actually generated from PowerPoint with Copilot. So I asked it to duplicate the slide. I was on the Word slide, and then asked it to put in the best ways to use Copilot. You can see it didn't take my formatting. It's a fine formatting, and there's a designer piece that you can adjust the formatting. So, the use of this is, I would say this is probably in its infancy. One thing that all of these are good at so far, the summarize piece. So if you're taking a document, we get documents from, say, Microsoft and some of our partners they can be a little meaty, and asking questions about the document, it's pretty good at that. The generation side, I think that's where, just continuing to test it, and, maybe using some pieces, I think that's where we're probably still in the early phases. So we've seen some good and some bad. I would like to share where I think where it is the best. So Copilot inside Teams is in my opinion, Microsoft's piece de resistance for the M365 version of Copilot. It includes so when you're in Teams and you have your chat up, so where you're chatting with any of your team members within your organization, you now have at the top a Copilot button. And now if you click that Copilot button, you're chatting with Copilot just like you would with ChatGPT. The cool thing is it's really good at accessing the Microsoft Graph. So that is Microsoft's web service access to basically all things that are in your tenant. So as an example, your email is accessible via Microsoft Graph. SharePoint documents are accessible from Microsoft Graph. So when I ask a question to Copilot in Teams, it's going and looking in all of those sources. It's doing that retrieval, that RAG that Josh talked about, and it's injecting that behind the scenes into a query and then giving me an answer. So in the examples here, I said looking for a document that describes. So when I'm asking, so you can search by keyword, right? And your normal, we all know how to search by keyword, but sometimes you don't know the specific word that you were looking for, or it's very generic, right? AI, there's only 2 letters, so it could be in lots of documents. But if I ask it about a concept, then it's going to go do that nearest neighbor, that similarity lookup, and I'll likely get answer like documents that match that, and then it's going to reference those documents in the answer. And so then I can, even if I like the answer, I can go to it. There's the way the reference is there, you can go to it. So that's really cool. It also sometimes will respond with the new loop components. Loop components might be things like where you see this copy button. So it's making it easy for you to copy that information. Let's say I asked it to draft an email. So back to the example with Outlook, I might say draft an email. And I've done this with some of our trainings, reference our core values or reference our flywheel. Those are documents that I know, or concepts within documents I know exist, and it can pull from. And so it will inject those into behind the scenes and then create an answer. And then sometimes what you'll see is it'll even say, instead of just copy, it might say, do you want to start this email, or do you want to create this document? So it's giving you an action, allowing the human to be in the middle. We talked about the side effects earlier. So we want to choose what actions we feel like as we design these plugins. Maybe updating HubSpot, not a big deal, right? Because that's a simple, like adding a comment on a HubSpot record, low risk. But drafting an email and sending it, yeah, we want a human to be in the loop on that one. So so it does a really great job at, doing things up to the point where a human really, needs to be in the loop. The other place that it's really great is meetings. So if you use Copilot in your Teams meetings, at the end of that meeting, it will generate a recap. And that recap will talk about the meeting, talk about the follow-up. Additionally, you can query, so on the right-hand side, you can see that I not just looked at the meeting notes, but I asked it a very specific question about the summit topics that we talked about. And so it generated, and this is a pretty good list. This is just about nailed every single topic that we plan to submit for summit. And so that's been a very useful. In fact, we were a specific example of this. We were on a call with one of our clients. We had 3 people on the call, and somehow on a very specific topic, we had 2 different versions. We had 2 different answers in our notes. And so what we did was we went back to Copilot. It was an hour-and-a-half long meeting. We had the transcription turned on. Make sure, thank you, David. You do need to turn on the transcription, and so you can even enable that automatically through AD, I believe. So you can you want to turn on transcription right from the beginning, and that's what it'll use to do the summary. So we asked it a question: what did our client discuss about quality? And we had very specific answers around that topic, and we were able to correct our notes. We went back to the transcript to verify. It had the links, if you can see on the right. And so that was a really, really useful. I mean, it saved a ton of time for going through all that. I don't know of a way that you can transcribe meetings that you don't own if it's set up by an external party. That is that's a gap that I'm aware of. And I believe you can turn it on automatically. All right. So, in my opinion, the Teams piece is worth the subscription price. Like I said, I use it just about every day, whether it's through the meetings piece or directly through chat with Copilot. So let's talk about security. We definitely had some questions earlier about security with Copilot. So the difference between Copilot and, say, OpenAI, behind the scenes, Copilot does run on Azure Open AI. So that's Microsoft's implementation of OpenAI. They have a very large investment in OpenAI, and so they have this deployed within your Azure tenant. So behind the scenes, Copilot is utilizing Azure OpenAI. The data is based on your tenant, and it doesn't leave your tenant. So their policy is that any Copilot usage, there's to my knowledge, they're not training on the prompts, they're not training on the data. So that's one way that, as opposed to OpenAI, if you have a free or a plus, Enterprise, their terms of service say that they're not training on the prompts as well. But with the plus version, I believe they can train on the prompts, just not the data. And then the free version, they can train on anything. You are the product in the free version. Permissions with Copilot. So Copilot on its response, when it gets, like, let's say it's doing the retrieval piece, it's taking into account your permissions. So that's one thing that it is good at. So it won't pull in things that you don't have access to, and so it won't give you a result that you shouldn't see. And that's important even as you take things beyond Copilot. So and if you think about other applications where AI, definitely check on the terms of service. The one that I really look for, just like if just having this one in your head, not only the data but training on the prompt. Because let's say you're putting something in that might be covered by NDA. If you are asking a question about that, then now you might be releasing your NDA data to a place where the terms of service don't match. The last thing on the security I mentioned earlier is the protections on the side effects. So Microsoft Copilot isn't going to do anything of any consequence without a human in the loop. They've been pretty good about this, and I encourage you to think about that when you are considering creating your own side effects. Definitely want to keep ethical and responsible protections on those side effects and keep human in the loop. So we've talked a little bit about where Copilot can get you, and I think that is the way to start if you're looking for a way to get into the AI to get more understanding. Definitely start with Copilot. It's really easy to begin, and it's a safe place, so it's keeping your data. Now we've talked about where Microsoft has gone and created that foundation. We're going to talk about where the gaps might be in that. So we've kind of seen some of those, but where can we take this? How can we solve larger problems than Adam's working on a presentation? And for that, I'll turn it over to Josh.
Yeah. So as Adam mentioned, Copilot can do a lot of great things sort of out of the box. Just to retouch on some of the points that he touched on, I use it a lot for summarizing transcripts, looking out for action items, some sentiment analysis. As a developer, I use Copilot for GitHub as a coding assistant that can help really accelerate our development, and it's really useful for automating and speeding up repetitive tasks. Very helpful for that. And also is getting better and better every day at generating code that needs very little, if any, modifications to it to get started. in addition to that, there's going to be times where it falls down a little bit. So as Adam mentioned, it has access to the data in Microsoft Graph, so the data in your tenant, but there is data that is not accessible via the graph that you may want to use in like a RAG implementation. And then there is also the fact that you're kind of at control of whatever or at the mercy of whatever Copilot is offering. You may want more finely grained control of that process. What kind of side effects are available? What kind of, again, external data you're pulling into the system? How are the pieces orchestrated? So to do that, then what we want to do is not look for, Microsoft and OpenAI have large development teams that are really building out really cool and interesting stuff like we've been talking about today. But on top of that, they do not know your business and they do not know your domain. So that approach is relatively general. And what we want to do is help find the white space that we can be valuable and leverage the tools that big players like Microsoft and OpenAI are creating while still bringing value and really, again, domain-specific information to your implementations. So to do that, again, revisiting the R in RAG is for retrieval. So to have an effective ingestion routine, so how are we preparing our data to be retrieved? Again, your information is not in the model, so it needs to be prepared through an embedding model so that we can do these sort of nearest neighbor similarity search lookups. So to do that, you want some type of AI enrichment pipeline. AI used to be cognitive search, but AI search in Azure is has some really cool pipeline tools that can help pull information from various sources like SharePoint or data lakes to help run those through a process where we can actually create the embeddings to be leveraged so that when we're doing our retrieval part of RAG, we're able to find the most relevant information to help include and embed in our context. So again, I think the Azure AI pipelines are a really great way to do this. You can have a visual approach to pulling in data sources and then connecting different parts of the pipeline, such as chunking large documents up into smaller pieces. There are the search functions work best when you have smaller data sources that are really really fine-tuned or really honed in to specific tasks. So instead of throwing a bunch of huge documents in a huge pool of data and then expecting our lookup routines to find the relevant information, it's much better to categorize and give great descriptions to smaller pools of data, chunk up the documents into smaller pieces, and then build an implementation that looks across those different data sources and builds really relevant context to help enrich our prompts. That process can get pretty complicated. If you had a really specific or complicated use case, you may build some graph of information across your data sources so that when you find this data source, you know it's connected to these other 5 documents and you can go pull those in. And that can really take your RAG implementation to a new level as far as how relevant and valuable are the sources that you're pulling into that implementation. So once you have all your information prepared to be leveraged and you've made different tools available to your pipeline, you have to orchestrate that information, right? So you can think of the orchestration for the actual RAG implementation. You may do like a manual approach that's more aligned with like traditional programming, where we perform this step and then we perform the next step and then we perform the next step. And every time it executes those same steps in order or based on rules, this step, and then if, then this other step. You can also use what's called agents or planners, and Adam touched on this earlier, that can, you basically, instead of defining exactly a rules-based approach, you can just provide the tools to the model and then ask the model to use the tools that you've given it to solve the answer in the best way that it sees fit. And that's really a really interesting approach, and probably the most popular approach right now, but there are still going to be times where you want to dig in and handle that manually. Then there's sort of, you can think of it as, in some ways, an external orchestration, where you may use something like Power Automate that's hooked up to like an HTTP trigger where some action occurs and then a Power Automate flow kicks in, does some of the process, and then calls out to a large language model to do different pieces of that process. So there's different approaches you can take to the orchestration piece of this. Getting into tooling, we've already touched on a lot of this, just briefly, not to get too technical, but probably the most popular language for LLM development is Python. There are also frameworks like LangChain and Semantic Kernel that offer TypeScript libraries and C# libraries. Microsoft and OpenAI offer their own libraries to help accelerate your internal AI development. And those are really useful, but I think long-term, things like LangChain and Semantic Kernel may not be the most performant approach. So over the long term, you're probably going to develop custom solutions to solve RAG implementations. And then just to touch on risk, Adam's touched on it some before, but the important thing, I think, is especially if you're already in the Microsoft ecosystem, is to use Azure Open AI versus just the Open AI, so that you're keeping your data inside of the Microsoft security or risk profile that you already have today, right? Your data is already in your tenant. Microsoft already has access to that data. If you're able to keep all your prompts within those sort of four walls, then you're not really expanding your risk profile. Sensitive data during that ingestion process, you may have pieces of that pipeline that look for sensitive data and strip it out during the preparation process. You may also have runtime tools that check any data that's been pulled in and maybe does a double check for sensitive data and strips them out during that process. I think if you're going to build secure pipelines, you also want to have extensive logging to make sure that if something does go wrong, you can go back and look at those logs and make sure that you can correct that situation or recover from anything that goes wrong. And then just to touch briefly on one more or two more kind of approaches. During the RAG pipelines, you may have multiple tools double check each other to make sure that they're all doing what they're supposed to do in the process. It's really a sort of an interesting approach. And then one other way that you can make sure that your responses are always sort of dependable and consistent would be to take like a canned response approach. So you may have several different responses that come out of your RAG implementation, and the system will choose the best one based on the request that's coming in and the context that it's found. And then as you find gaps where, hey, this canned response isn't exactly the response that we want, you can just add more canned responses to the process. And that way you have really strong controls and you know exactly what information is coming out of that process.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Go ahead, Adam. Yeah.
I was going to mention those are good as an example for like maybe external facing, right? You know, most of us here on the call don't have the budget of a Microsoft or a Google. So, and even them, we've seen where, left completely unfettered, we've seen some results. So, taking a conservative approach, like Josh mentioned, when it's external facing, you can protect against, unwanted results.
Exactly. Just to touch on some brief examples of sort of going beyond Copilot and the things that we can do. A good one that we touched on earlier would be like support ticket enhancement. So some request comes in, there's some information or some question or some issue that comes in on the support ticket. You're able to look at your company's data and processes and help add additional context to that support ticket. And then when your support team is executing, they already have that context. They don't have to go look it up. That could be a really useful approach. Customer satisfaction analysis. So looking at emails from specific customers and determining how satisfied is this customer, what are their pain points, that sort of thing. It can be really useful to boil down that sort of sentiment to make it really easy to ingest. You can do advanced document generation. So Adam mentioned before, Words has some templates and it does an okay job, but you may have a really complicated document that you want generated, and you would build your own process to leverage AI to help build those documents. And then another one that I think is really exciting is centralizing communications for specific customers or projects, so that it's able to check, is everybody meeting their action items? What action items are assigned? When are they due? Helping new people on the project get up to speed quickly and learn all about the project by just asking a few questions, instead of having to go knock down a bunch of people's doors or dig through some document repository to get that information. So I think having like a project Copilot in this case, where it helps police your processes and centralize your data and keep everybody organized and communicating efficiently, is really one of the best use cases for this approach.
Yeah, anywhere you can come, you've got unstructured data, logs, notes, transcripts, all of that stuff that we're good at as humans, as comprehending, at least individually. Getting that ingested into a place where then you can query it, or something else, an automation query it. That's a really, really great. I think of that. I always try to think of like that. It's really great at unstructured to structured. So assigning a sentiment value or satisfaction value from an unstructured email. That's an example of going from unstructured to structured. All right. Well, we are going to move in, and we'll keep talking about some examples through this, but we'll move into some of the Q&A that folks have sent in. We'll start out with, when should I try to use AI? Every day. Quite frankly, it's a practice, right? The first time I asked OpenAI something, I hadn't internalized that it was a true chat, like that. Once I got a response, I didn't have to start over again, and it was just like a one-time completion. Using it as a chat, where you get a response and you say, you know what, that wasn't quite right. I'd like to tweak it. You can give it some more instruction, and it's good at updating that. So definitely using it's a practice, and it's easy to practice in somewhere safe like Copilot. So add in your Copilot, or if you have non-sensitive data that you want to try it on with something like OpenAI, but if you don't want to run that risk, adding Copilot, it's not that much, and you can definitely get a lot of value out of it, especially with some practice.
Yeah, I think. I'm sorry, Adam. I was just going to mention that I think from a low barrier of entry standpoint to getting the most value out, I think it's really easy to use it to help brainstorm and get your juices flowing, help so that it can just help get something quickly on paper, and then you can go in and expand it and just work with it iteratively to help build something. And I think also, again, simple automation. There's some spreadsheet that you need to add a bunch of rows to, and it's really repetitive, and it can do a really good job of just, you give it some rules, you give it the source, and then it spits out usually a pretty good automated response.
Yeah, the idea generator, I definitely like that one. I'll give an example of that one. We have a list of heuristics, of sort of rules or guidelines that we have for our functional requirements documents on the ERP side. And we saw a scenario where we followed those, and there still ended up being a gap. And so we actually put the rules in, we put the gap. This was in Copilot, remember, not in OpenAI. We put that in, and we said, here's what happened. Here's the gap. Devise 3 new rules three new heuristics to make sure we don't have this gap again. And we took 2 of them. So it's great at that type of analysis, and you can do that right there in the Copilot chat. On the Business Central side, this April, so all the Dynamics and Power Platform are on major release cycles for April and October. So April, they'll begin, so we're a few days away from general availability for the next major version of Business Central. And that is one that you'll be soon be able to use chat against Business Central. It'll be its first release. You can also, within Business Central, you can already use, so there's a number of AP automation providers out there, and they do a great job of analyzing invoices, PO matching. A lot of that's done with AI in order to choose the right pieces of those PDFs to then ingest into Business Central. That's another one. And then lastly, Power Automate connects to Business Central. So you can begin to devise workflows or flows inside Power Automate that connects to Business Central. If a piece of data isn't exposed from Business Central for the base APIs, that's really, really quick to add an API to expose that, and we can help you with that. Good questions. How can you ensure that your prompts and responses are secure? So I'll start with maybe the business side. I mentioned earlier checking the terms of service. I think that's a really important one. You know, it's not, and look, it's still early days of, you know, there haven't been a lot from what we discussed with our legal partners. There hasn't been a lot of tests against say the ingestion. You know, there's some big ones out there, but you know, with companies of our size, there haven't been a lot of tests. But you know, we're trying to take a conservative approach, and so checking the terms of service specifically on are your prompts used to train, and is your data used to train? So that's where I would start.
Yeah, I think some other areas is I think it's important to use user level authorization. So we talk about, and it's really natural to think about, I don't want my sensitive data leaving my 4 walls. But I think it is definitely also important to think about, does a specific user within my organization have access to some document that's being used for context in the prompts? Or because that information is going to get bubbled back out in the response. So it's going to be very important to make sure that you have controls in place to make sure that any information that's pulled into the RAG pipeline, that user actually has access to. And then we've already touched on like ways to strip out sensitive data during ingestion. And again, for the external walls or the 4 walls concept, using Azure Open AI if you're already in the Microsoft ecosystem, because you're really not extending your risk profile.
Awesome. AI automation in state agencies, where to start and how. So in my opinion, you know, any large organization tends to, and state agencies would qualify here, tend to have lots of policies, procedures, you know, we're you know, as an organization grows, or the breadth at which they are exposed to, you know, maybe they're an agency that their constituents interact with. As that growth happens, you know, you need to be more procedural, and so those documents get bigger and bigger. And if you haven't generated those documents, you know, that's institutional knowledge, and that's an asset, right? So you can use generative AI to generate those if you're missing those. So you know, in the private sector, you think manufacturing, and there are, you know, people leaving the workforce as they age out that have tons and tons of knowledge about that organization. So all of this is about making sure we, step one, have the information, the asset, which is that the institutional knowledge. Two, okay, when we have the larger the organization, the more institutional knowledge we have, the harder it is to sift through, right? So we know the stereotype of say having to work through the sort of the bureaucracy of large organizations, but this is an opportunity for us to have great procedural and very detailed procedural knowledge, institutional knowledge, but then be able to get access to it quickly, right? So we can query that and we can get exactly what I need to do, even in a complex organization. And I think that has a lot of potential for both state agencies and large organizations on being able to help people move quicker through their organization. So that one's exciting to me. How do you use AI for logistical security of loads? So for me, this one kind of rang in the, so I think of security, I think of things like anomaly detection. So we might use some of the techniques that Josh mentioned earlier with ingestion and fine tuning. So we know some scenarios where maybe there was a security problem, and so we can maybe fine tune the model with those examples, and then we could be sending various feeds of information, some of which could be unstructured. For instance, logging, that data can be sent in unstructured, and then we use a fine-tuned model to maybe identify anomalies that then a human can then take action upon.
Yeah, just to expand on that, if you're sort of some out of the box functionality you may leverage if you're in Azure would be something like Microsoft Defender or Sentinel. Sentinel in particular, all of your logging data can go to a Sentinel log, and it's looking at that log and using AI to do sort of some of the anomaly detection and that sort of thing that Adam talked about earlier. So that's sort of a out of the box solution where you can go ahead and get some value out of it.
All right. I am seeing that we're getting close to the time. So with that, I know there's plenty of other great questions. I'm going to skip ahead. I certainly encourage everyone, we are happy to work with you both from an educational perspective, but also if you have use cases that maybe, as we talked about today, that you think that would be a good fit, we'd love to do a proof of concept with you. We're definitely, we'd be happy to share in some costs in that. I think this is an interesting new phase of and the dam is being sort of unlocked to do some pretty cool stuff. So, chat with us. We'd love to hear what's on your mind. We'd be happy to answer any of the questions that went unanswered, as well as collaborate with you on what's next for you. All right. Thank you, everybody, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.